Albert Camus and Fyodor Dostoevsky are often placed side by side because they confronted the same unbearable question. How can human beings live in a world where innocent people suffer? Both men wrote from inside catastrophe. Dostoevsky endured mock execution, prison camps, poverty, and lifelong illness. Camus lived through colonial violence, war, tuberculosis, and the collapse of political ideals. Neither of them treated suffering as an abstraction. It was the central fact of their lives. Yet what they believed suffering meant could not be more different. Dostoevsky believed that pain belongs to a divine story. Even when suffering appears unjust, he believed it will be redeemed by God. Human beings might not understand that redemption, but it exists. Without it, Dostoevsky feared that life would collapse into nihilism and cruelty. Camus believed the opposite. He believed suffering has no hidden purpose, no final explanation, no cosmic compensation. A child who is tortured does not become meaningful because heaven exists. A victim who dies unjustly is not balanced by eternity. Suffering for Camus is tragic precisely because it is meaningless. That difference is everything. Dostoevsky asked, "How can suffering be reconciled with God?" Camus asked, "How can we live knowing it cannot be?" Dostoevsky's novels are haunted by the idea that if God exists, then suffering must make sense. Camus's work is haunted by the idea that if suffering does not make sense, then nothing excuses it. This is not a minor philosophical disagreement, it is a moral divide. Dostoevsky believed human beings are broken but infinitely valuable because they are loved by God. Even the worst criminal can be redeemed. Even the deepest pain has a place in the divine order. Camus believed human beings are fragile, but infinitely valuable because they suffer. No divine plan stands behind their pain. That makes their lives not less important, but more. When nothing will justify suffering later, the demand to reduce it now becomes absolute. This is why Camus admired Dostoevsky deeply and yet could never follow him. He admired Dostoevsky's courage in facing horror. He rejected Dostoevsky's willingness to explain it. One placed hope in heaven. The other placed hope in human resistance. That tension will shape everything that follows. For Dostoevsky, faith was not a gentle belief. It was a desperate necessity. He believed that without God, moral limits would collapse. If there is no divine law and no eternal judgment, then human beings would have nothing to restrain their cruelty. This fear runs through all his work. Characters who lose faith drift toward nihilism, violence, and despair. His most famous line expresses this terror. If God does not exist, everything is permitted. Camus rejected this idea completely. Camus did not believe morality depends on God. He believed morality begins when God disappears. When there is no divine authority to command obedience, human beings must decide for themselves how to treat one another. They cannot hide behind heaven. They cannot excuse suffering as part of a divine plan. Dostoevsky believed faith protects humanity from evil. Camus believed faith allows evil to be endured. This is one of Camus's most radical claims. If suffering is part of God's will, then it must be accepted. If injustice will be compensated in heaven, then it can be tolerated on earth. Faith becomes a way of surviving cruelty rather than resisting it. Camus could not accept this. For Camus, every explanation of suffering is a betrayal of the sufferer. To say that pain has meaning is to turn a wounded person into a tool for some higher purpose. Camus believed no one has the right to do that. This is why he spoke of revolt rather than faith. Revolt does not explain suffering, it refuses it. Where Dostoevsky kneels before mystery, Camus stands before injustice. Where Dostoevsky waits for God's answer, Camus demands a human response. He does not ask why suffering exists. He asks what we are going to do about it. This is the ethical heart of Camus's philosophy. Dostoevsky believed faith gives suffering meaning. Camus believed suffering gives us responsibility. And that difference shapes how they imagine love, guilt, justice, and hope. In Dostoevsky's world, people endure pain because it will be redeemed. In Camus's world, people resist pain because nothing will redeem it. If suffering is meaningless, then every moment of relief becomes sacred. This is why Camus could never accept Dostoevsky's theology, even though he respected his genius. Dostoevsky gave suffering a story. Camus refused to let suffering become a story. The deepest point of conflict between Camus and Dostoevsky emerges when they confront the suffering of those who have done nothing wrong. In the Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky gives one of the most powerful indictments of God ever written. Ivan Karamazov recounts stories of children beaten, tortured, and murdered. He asks how any loving God could allow such horrors. The pain is so unbearable that Ivan says he returns his ticket to a world built on such suffering. Yet Dostoevsky does not stop there. Despite Ivan's rebellion, Dostoevsky ultimately affirms faith. He suggests that even this suffering will one day be redeemed, that in the final harmony of the universe, even the tears of tortured children will be justified by eternal love. Camus found this intolerable. For Camus, no future harmony can justify a single scream. No heaven can compensate for a child's agony. To accept such compensation is to treat suffering as a necessary ingredient in a divine plan. Camus believed that this turns victims into sacrifices, and sacrifices are always demanded from the powerless. Camus did not deny the depth of suffering. He denied that it could be made meaningful. To give pain a purpose is to make it easier to inflict. If suffering leads to salvation, then someone somewhere will decide that more suffering is required. Dostoevsky wanted to save the soul of the world. Camus wanted to save its bodies. Dostoevsky believed pain could be spiritually fruitful. Camus believed pain was simply destructive. This difference shapes their entire moral outlook. In Dostoevsky, suffering becomes a test of faith. In Camus, suffering becomes a demand for action. If there is no higher meaning behind pain, then nothing excuses it. For Camus, the only honest response to innocent suffering is refusal. You do not ask why it exists. You ask how to stop it. You do not accept it as necessary. You treat it as a scandal. Dostoevsky's God promises that everything will make sense. Camus's revolt promises nothing, except that no one should be sacrificed for an idea. This is why Camus could admire Dostoevsky's compassion while rejecting his theology. Dostoevsky wanted suffering to be healed in heaven. Camus wanted it reduced on earth. One makes suffering sacred. The other makes it unacceptable. And in that difference lies the heart of their disagreement. Dostoevsky believed that human beings are fundamentally fallen. His characters are driven by pride, desire, jealousy, and rebellion against God. Crime, in his novels, is not merely a social failure. It is a spiritual rupture. To do wrong is to separate yourself from God, and only repentance and grace can restore what has been broken. Camus rejected this entire framework. Camus did not believe people are sinful. He believed they are fragile. They do terrible things not because their souls are corrupt, but because they are afraid, desperate, lonely, or overwhelmed. Crime is not proof of metaphysical evil. It is evidence of human vulnerability under pressure. This difference changes how guilt works. Dostoevsky's characters are haunted by what they have done to God. Camus' characters are haunted by what they have done to other people. In Dostoevsky, punishment is meant to cleanse. Suffering purifies the soul. In Camus, punishment exists to prevent further harm. It does not redeem, it only protects. This is why Camus opposed capital punishment so fiercely. To kill someone in the name of justice is, in his view, to repeat the crime. There is no God waiting to balance the scales. Once a life is taken, it is gone forever. Dostoevsky could accept suffering because God would redeem it. Camus could not, because no one would. For Camus, morality becomes more demanding when God is removed. You can no longer offload responsibility onto heaven. Every act of cruelty remains exactly what it is, a wound inflicted on a living person. Dostoevsky's moral world is vertical, oriented toward God. Camus' moral world is horizontal, oriented toward humanity. Both are moral visions, but only one refuses to make suffering holy. In the Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky gives one of the most haunting parables ever written, the story of the Grand Inquisitor. Christ returns to earth during the Spanish Inquisition. He heals the sick and offers hope, and is immediately arrested by the Church. The Grand Inquisitor explains that humanity does not truly want freedom. People want certainty, bread, and authority. So the Church has taken Christ's message and turned it into power. Dostoevsky presents this as a tragedy. The Church has betrayed Christ, but it believes it is saving humanity from chaos. Camus saw something darker. For Camus, the Grand Inquisitor is not just a tragic figure, he is a warning. When people claim to act for God, they place themselves above human suffering. They justify cruelty in the name of salvation. They decide who must be sacrificed so that order can be maintained. Camus believed this logic does not belong only to religion. It appears in every ideology that promises a perfect future. Whether it is heaven or utopia, the result is the same. People are told to endure suffering now for a greater good later. Camus rejected this bargain. No future has the right to demand present pain. No heaven can justify torture. No revolution can excuse murder. Dostoevsky trusted faith to restrain power. Camus believed faith could empower it. This is why Camus distrusted every authority that claimed moral certainty. When a system believes it represents divine or historical truth, it becomes willing to crush individuals. The Grand Inquisitor believes he is saving humanity. Camus believed this belief is what makes him dangerous. To say, "I know what is best for you," is to place yourself above another person's suffering. Camus believed no one has that right. This is why revolt is always against authority that claims absolute truth. It is not chaos, it is humility before human pain. Dostoevsky believed that crime was a rupture in the soul. His murderers are not simply lawbreakers, they are spiritual beings who have violated a divine order. Their suffering is part of their redemption. Raskolnikov, in Crime and Punishment, must endure humiliation, confession, and inner torment before he can be reborn through faith. Pain, for Dostoevsky, has a cleansing function. Camus rejected this logic completely. For Camus, crime is not a metaphysical fall. It is a human tragedy. People harm others because something in their lives has broken. Poverty, rage, humiliation, despair, confusion. To respond by inflicting more suffering in the name of moral purification only multiplies cruelty in the world. Dostoevsky wanted punishment to save souls. Camus wanted punishment to limit harm. This difference reshapes justice itself. In Dostoevsky's universe, punishment is meaningful because God will complete the moral accounting. In Camus' universe, there is no higher court. There is only this life. Once someone is killed, nothing will make it right. This is why Camus opposed the death penalty so fiercely. To execute a criminal is to repeat the crime while pretending it is justice. Without God, there is no cosmic ledger to balance the loss. A human life destroyed is simply gone. Dostoevsky could accept suffering because heaven would redeem it. Camus could not, because nothing would. For Camus, justice must always be limited by compassion. You can restrain, you can isolate, you can protect others, but you cannot claim the moral right to annihilate someone. To do so is to pretend that you stand above them in a higher moral realm. Dostoevsky's justice is vertical. Crimes are measured against God. Camus' justice is horizontal. Crimes are measured against suffering. In Camus' view, justice is not about moral purity. It is about preventing the world from becoming more brutal than it already is. That modesty, he believed, is what makes justice human. Both Camus and Dostoevsky were driven by deep compassion for human beings. but they understood love in very different ways. Dostoevsky saw love as inseparable from God. To love someone is to see them as a soul destined for eternity. Forgiveness, in his world, is an act of divine grace that restores a broken spiritual order. Camus believed love does not need heaven. For Camus, love is not about salvation, it is about presence. To love someone is to stand with them in their suffering without pretending it has meaning. It is not to say, this will all make sense someday, but I am here with you now. Dostoevsky's love looks upward, toward God. Camus' love looks sideways, toward the wounded. Dostoevsky could accept suffering because it was part of a redemptive story. Camus could not, because stories about suffering always risk turning pain into something that must be endured. Solidarity, for Camus, means refusing to normalize suffering. This is why Camus was suspicious of pity. Pity can view suffering from above. It can comfort itself by thinking, this is tragic, but it has a purpose. Solidarity stands inside suffering. It does not explain, it acts. Dostoevsky's compassion redeems. Camus's compassion resists. To Dostoevsky, even the worst criminal remains a soul worthy of eternal forgiveness. Camus agreed that no one is beyond compassion, but he did not believe forgiveness requires God. You forgive because you recognize another fragile human being in front of you. This makes Camus's love quieter and more fragile, but also more urgent. It does not rely on eternity, it relies on the moment. Dostoevsky believed love connects us to heaven. Camus believed love connects us to each other, and in a world without divine guarantees, Camus believed that was enough. At the center of Camus and Dostoevsky's disagreement lies the silence of the universe. Dostoevsky believed this silence was only apparent. God might seem distant, cruelly quiet, or hidden, but he was still there. Suffering belonged to a divine story that would one day be revealed. Faith was the courage to trust that story even when it could not be seen. Camus did not believe this. For Camus, the silence of the universe was not a mystery waiting to be solved. It was the truth. The world does not explain itself. It does not justify suffering. It does not respond to human cries. This confrontation between our longing for meaning and the world's refusal to provide it is what Camus called the absurd. Dostoevsky filled this silence with God. Camus refused to fill it with anything. This refusal was not nihilism, it was honesty. Camus believed that inventing meaning in the face of silence was a form of escape. Faith, from his perspective, was not courage. It was a way of avoiding the unbearable reality that no one is in charge. Dostoevsky feared that without God, life would become morally empty. Camus feared that with God, suffering would become morally acceptable. This is why Camus described religious belief as philosophical suicide. It leaps over the absurd instead of living inside it. It trades the hard truth of a silent universe for the comfort of a cosmic parent. But Camus did not want comfort. He wanted clarity. To accept the absurd is to accept that there is no hidden justice waiting behind the curtain, no final explanation, no eternal compensation. And once you accept this, suffering becomes intolerable in a new way. If nothing will make it right later, then every injustice becomes absolute. This is why Camus believed the absurd creates responsibility rather than despair. When God is gone, no one will forgive or punish for us. Only human beings remain. One of the most powerful figures in Dostoevsky's work is Ivan Karamazov, the man who cannot accept a universe built on the suffering of innocent children. Ivan does not deny God's existence. He rejects God's justice. Even if heaven exists, even if eternal harmony awaits, he refuses to accept a world that requires children to suffer. Camus admired Ivan deeply. To Camus, Ivan represents the most honest religious conscience Dostoevsky ever created. He looks directly at suffering and refuses to justify it. But Ivan's rebellion collapses under its own weight because he is still trapped inside faith. He wants justice from God, and when it does not come, his mind breaks. Camus removes God from the equation entirely. If there is no divine judge, then there is no one to protest to. Revolt must turn outward, not upward. You do not argue with heaven. You confront injustice where it exists, among human beings. Dostoevsky's rebellion asks, how can God allow this? Camus' revolt says, this must not be allowed by anyone. This is one of Camus' most radical transformations of Dostoevsky. He takes Ivan's moral outrage and strips away the theology. What remains is a fierce demand for human responsibility. For Camus, waiting for divine justice is a form of surrender. Every moment spent explaining suffering is a moment not spent resisting it. Revolt is not metaphysical, it is practical. You oppose torture, you oppose lies, you oppose humiliation. You do not wait for cosmic permission. Dostoevsky hoped that love would be justified by God. Camus believed love must justify itself through action. This is why Camus rejected every philosophy that makes suffering meaningful. The moment pain becomes meaningful, someone somewhere will decide it is necessary, and when suffering becomes necessary, cruelty becomes holy. Camus refused that logic completely. To revolt is not to deny tragedy. It is to deny that tragedy has the right to rule. Dostoevsky's Ivan is torn apart by his refusal to accept heaven. Camus' rebel stands firmly on earth. He does not seek cosmic answers, he seeks human solidarity. At the deepest level, the conflict between Camus and Dostoevsky is a conflict about what gives a human being dignity. For Dostoevsky, dignity comes from the soul's relationship to God. No matter how broken or sinful a person is, they remain infinitely valuable because they are loved by God. Even the most degraded criminal carries a divine spark that can be redeemed. Even the most tortured victim belongs to eternity. Human worth is anchored in heaven. Camus did not deny human dignity, but he refused to place it outside the world. For Camus, dignity is not granted by God, it is claimed through refusal. A human being becomes dignified when they refuse to accept humiliation, cruelty, or injustice as normal. To say no to suffering, even when you cannot defeat it, is what gives life its moral weight. Dostoevsky's dignity is metaphysical. Camus's dignity is existential. Dostoevsky believed suffering could ennoble the soul. Camus believed suffering only degrades unless it is resisted. Endurance is not virtue. Submission is not holiness. This is why Camus could never accept a morality built on patience and sacrifice. He did not believe people should learn to endure injustice. He believed they should learn to confront it. In Dostoevsky's world, saints are those who suffer quietly. In Camus' world, heroes are those who refuse to let others suffer. This shift changes everything. It changes how we understand goodness, love, and courage. Dostoevsky's moral universe is vertical. People look upward for validation. Camus' moral universe is horizontal. People look toward one another. Dostoevsky believed humility before God saves the soul. Camus believed refusal before cruelty saves the person. To kneel for Dostoevsky is to acknowledge divine truth. To kneel for Camus is to surrender human dignity. This is why Camus placed such importance on revolt, not violent revolution, but moral resistance. The simple act of saying, "This is wrong," even when you are powerless to change it, preserves something essential about being human. Dostoevsky gives us a world of holy suffering. Camus gives us a world of wounded people trying not to wound one another further. And in that fragile struggle, Camus believed, true dignity lives. Both Camus and Dostoevsky were obsessed with hope, but they meant radically different things by it. For Dostoevsky, hope is inseparable from faith. No matter how terrible suffering becomes, there is always the promise that it will be redeemed. Tears will be wiped away. Injustice will be corrected. What looks meaningless now will one day be revealed as part of a greater harmony. Hope allows people to endure what would otherwise be unbearable. Camus saw something dangerous in this. When hope is tied to heaven, it becomes a way of postponing justice. If suffering will be made right later, then it becomes easier to tolerate it now. If pain will be rewarded in eternity, then it becomes easier to allow it on earth. Hope becomes a tranquilizer. Camus did not want people to endure. He wanted them to resist. This is why Camus spoke of living without appeal. To live without appeal means to refuse to appeal to God, destiny, or history for justification. You do not say, "This will make sense someday." You say, "This is wrong now." Dostoevsky's hope looks beyond the world. Camus' hope stays inside it. This does not make Camus a pessimist. He believed deeply in human solidarity, in love, and in the quiet heroism of people who stand together against suffering. But he believed hope must be grounded in what people do, not in what God might someday fix. To hope in heaven is to wait. To hope in people is to act. Camus believed despair does not come from meaninglessness, but from powerlessness. When people feel they cannot change anything, they become numb. But when they discover even a small ability to reduce suffering, to comfort, to protest, to protect, life regains intensity. Dostoevsky's hope asks us to trust the universe. Camus' hope asks us to trust each other. And in a silent world, Camus believed, only the second form of trust makes sense. This is why Camus could never accept Dostoevsky's final reconciliation. A world that promises cosmic justice can survive terrible cruelty. A world that offers only human justice must be careful with every life. Camus chose the harder hope, the one with no guarantee. Albert Camus and Fyodor Dostoevsky loved human beings with equal intensity. They both wrote out of a deep sensitivity to pain, injustice, and the fragile beauty of human life. Yet they offered two incompatible ways of responding to suffering. Dostoevsky loved humanity as fallen souls longing for God. He believed that even the darkest pain belonged to a divine story that would one day be healed. Faith, for him, was not escape. It was rescue. It allowed people to believe that no tear was wasted. Camus loved humanity as wounded creatures living under an indifferent sky. He did not believe suffering would be redeemed. He believed it must be resisted. Every injustice was final. Every death was absolute. That made compassion not optional, but urgent. Dostoevsky's love is vertical. Camus' love is horizontal. One looks toward heaven. The other looks toward the neighbor. Dostoevsky could accept pain because he believed it would be healed. Camus could not because he believed it would not. This did not make Camus colder, it made him more demanding. Where Dostoevsky teaches endurance, Camus teaches refusal. Where Dostoevsky teaches faith, Camus teaches dignity. Where Dostoevsky offers redemption, Camus offers solidarity. Neither man was naive. Both knew human beings are capable of monstrous cruelty, but they disagreed on what could restrain it. Dostoevsky trusted God. Camus trusted people. This is why their conflict still matters. We still live in a world where innocent people suffer. We still face the question of whether that suffering has meaning or whether it simply demands action. Dostoevsky asks us to believe. Camus asks us to stand. In the end, the choice between them is not theological, it is ethical. It is about what you do when you encounter pain. Do you explain it, or do you resist it? Do you wait for justice, or do you try to create it? Camus believed that to love humanity in a silent universe is to refuse every excuse for cruelty. No idea, no faith, no future is worth a single human life. That is his revolt. That is his compassion. And that is why he could never follow Dostoevsky, even as he admired him.